And Dr. Ambedkar focused entire academic attention on how to reduce economic equality, caste, tribal, gender, and bring an equality in the society. That was his main goal. Honorable Chief Minister, Honorable Minister of Education, distinguished guests on the dais, distinguished participants in the audience, the representative of the all organization which have organized this conference on economic thoughts of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, people from the press, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin with congratulations and appreciation to these various organizations who have decided to celebrate these 100 years of publication of Problem of RUPEE, the DSc thesis of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. And the topic that they have selected, the economic thoughts and contribution of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, is a very relevant subject today. I understand that from the program that there will be a couple of sessions in the afternoon, and there will be discussion on various economic thoughts of Ambedkar. I would like to share with you in a whatever time I have on the economic thoughts of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, with a focus on his theory and strategy of economic development with equity and social justice. Now, we are not discussing here the social thought or religious thoughts or political thoughts of Dr. Ambedkar. We have confined our discussion to his writing on economics. Now, Dr. Ambedkar, as you know, was essentially an economist, in the sense that he got his Ph.D. degree from Columbia University in 1927. He's got his DSc degree in economics from London School of Economics in 1923. His MSc in economics was also from London School of Economics. So his basic degrees are in economics. The London University did not have a Ph.D. degree when he joined London School of Economics in 1917. They used to call DSc. London School of Economics started Ph.D. degree after 1921. So in effect, these are both Ph.D. degrees, Columbia University as well as the DSc degree from London School of Economics. Now, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar has written quite substantially on economic theme of economics. Let me first give you a brief idea on listing his economic writing, because we have neglected in the discussion, and even academicians have neglected in the discussion on the economic thought and writing of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. Of course, his first book was Problem of RUPEE, which is completed 100 years in 2023. But also next year, his second book, the Ph.D. from Columbia University, is going to complete another 100 years. So, in fact, the organizers should have combined both the books together. His first DSc book was on exchange rate. What should be the exchange rate between the rupee and the pound? Or at that time it was called even sterling. The Ph.D. thesis, Ph.D. book from Columbia University was on public finance, provincial public finance. Both were published by the King publisher in 2023 and 2024. And Dr. Ambedkar then immediately emerged as an eminent economist in the early 20s. Later on, or prior to that, when he came back from London, he wrote an article in 1918 in Journal of Economic Society of India. It was on a small holding, problem of small holding, but basically it is a theory of economic development, and that is more important article which laid down the theory of economic development. So if we include his economic writing, Problem of Rupee, which deals with the exchange rate policy, the Ph.D. thesis which deals with public finance, that is government expenditure, taxation and expenditure. In 1918, his celebrated paper on theory of economic development. In fact, J. Krishnamurthy has brought out a book in which he has picked up 10 eminent economists before independence and those who have done Ph.D. from outside. And he included Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar in that book as eminent economist before independence who have done Ph.D. from outside, and his 1918 paper on small holding is included in that. So these are three very important economic writing of Dr. Ambedkar. Of course, during the course of politics, he has expressed his view on many economic issues. He set up two political parties, Independent Labour Party and Scheduled Caste Federation, and later on Republican Party of India. In the manifesto of these three parties, we get his economic thought and his views on economic policy, which we must understand. And finally, The State and Minority is a very important book. That was the constitution that he had in his mind, and he has submitted the draft or memorandum to the Constitutional Assembly, to the Fundamental Right Committee. And there he laid down his final solution, economic solution on policies in the state and minority. So if we take all that together and digest it, read it and digest it properly, we can then understand what are the economic thought of Ambedkar. Because I think we carried away by slogans about him, but to understand his basic economic writing as relevant today is very, very important. So friend, what I will do is, within another couple of minutes, what I will do is to share with you very briefly and in a simple language, Ambedkar's economic thought on three areas. One, his theory of economic development, particularly the theory of agriculture development, which he developed in the paper in 1980. It's a less known paper, but it is included in the book of eminent economists. Second issue that I will discuss is the strategy of economic development. Now, strategy of economic development is important simply because he was a labor minister in 1942 to 46 in the British government. And as a result of labor minister, he took several policy decisions for labor. But what is important is that he was also in charge of water and power policy. And I brought out a book for the first time based on the files, Ambedkar's role in water and power policy. And I described in that book that Ambedkar, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was a founder of India's water policy at the center, not the state. And this book is brought out by Central Water Commission. But what is important in 1942-46, please remember and understand, is this, that the Second World War had come to an end, was going to come to an end, and the soldier will come back from the war. The industries which were producing war material were to be converted into peace industry, which will produce consumer good now, capital goods. So government in 1940-46 set up what is called a reconstruction and rehabilitation plan. And Dr. Ambedkar, being the Minister of Labour, he was the member of that reconstruction plan. And that reconstruction plan is very important. It is in the reconstruction plan that Dr. Ambedkar brought his economic view, laid down the objective of the reconstruction plan, strategies of reconstruction plan, policies for labour, policies for scheduled caste. And then in 46 he resigned. But entire reconstruction plan went into the first 5-year plan. But Dr. Ambedkar's approach was not brought as much as it should have been brought. But we can see his views on strategies of economic development which are relevant today and which we need to understand. In fact, when I say that the strategies and the policies we were developing in the reconstruction plan went into the first 5-year plan, 51 to 56, we can see that. He set up the Central Water Commission and Central Electricity Authority, today's. At that time it was called Central Irrigation and Navigation Commission and Central Power Board. He set up. He developed a policy. I will talk about that later briefly. And that he started construction on the dam. So he started construction on Damodar Dam, Hirakund Dam, Son River and River of Deccan. And these all proposals and policies were taken into the first 5 plan. Damodar plan was later on, Damodar Dam was later on developed. Hirakund Dam, he laid down the foundation, and it is Jawaharlal Nehru who went to Bhubaneswar and inaugurated the beginning of the Hirakund Dam. So you can see that everything that he did as a water and power minister were carried through the first 5 plan. But what we can do here is briefly is what is his view on strategy of economic development. That literature of the rehabilitation and construction plan gives us an opportunity to understand his view on economic development. And the third point that I will share with you briefly, that as an economist, he studies the economics of caste system. Everybody talks about sociology of caste system, religion of caste system, but he studied the economic foundation of the caste system and then gave the policies. His policies are essentially, although he started asking for a policies from 1990 to 1945-46, but his gist of his wisdom in terms of policy comes in state and minorities. The policies against economic exploitation, policies against social discrimination. So I think these are the 3 issues that I will quickly discuss. Instead of going into slogan, we have to understand his hardcore view. Now let us begin with his theory of economic development, which he laid down in 1918 paper, and then his relevance in the present time. Now I don't want to go, because this is not a hardcore academic mob, but I will put it in a very simple word, that in 1990 and 1918 the issue was why agriculture is underdeveloped in India. And the argument was that we have a lot of small holding, income is low, poverty is high. And Dr. Ambedkar analyzed the Indian agriculture and examined as to why agriculture productivity is low, poverty is high in agriculture. And briefly, to put very briefly, his argument was that the poverty is high because income is low. And income is low because investment in agriculture is low. But investment in agriculture in capital input, seed, fertilizer, machinery is very low. But there is excessive use of labor. You require 1 labor, you use 10 labor, because there are a lot of labor in rural area. So what he said was that we use more of labor and less of capital. That is why the productivity of land per acre is low, and then income per person is low. And as a result, since the income per person is low, there is a poverty. People do not have enough income to buy necessities. So he gave a solution. So under investment in capital asset and more use of labor is the reason for the backwardness of agriculture. That's an economic theory that he gave. So he argued that move the labor, surplus labor and idle labor from agriculture to industry. So he emphasized industrialization to suck away, to draw surplus labor from agriculture to industry, so that pressure on land will be less, size of land holding will be small. And then he suggested you invest in capital, invest in seed, fertilizer, manure, machinery. And also then he emphasized as a irrigation and power minister on development of irrigation. In fact, he developed a policy for irrigation and water development. So in brief, his solution for economic development was to go for industrialization, transfer the surplus labor from agriculture, rural area to industry, and make investment in agriculture in modern input. That was the suggestion by Dr. Ambedkar, and I must share with you very briefly that he proposed industrialization with the use of surplus labor with lower wages. In 1956, Arthur Lewis, I didn't understand what Chief Minister said, but I could understand that he mentioned that he will get a Nobel Prize in economics. Arthur Lewis developed the theory of economic development with unlimited supply of labor. Very famous, economists will know here. And he got a Nobel Prize. He was a professor at London School of Economics. Now this is the theory of Dr. Ambedkar. I think it is relevant today. Our agriculture development has come through what Dr. Ambedkar has suggested, that we are trying to reduce the surplus labor from agriculture, passing on to industry, and industrial development is coming up because labor supply is cheap, lower wages. And at the same time, we are investing in agriculture, in modern technology, developing irrigation, canal irrigation, tank irrigation. Now friends, this is what his views are in brief. I am not making them complicated. Now, later, this is the paper in 1990. Now in 42-46, he became a Minister of Labour in the British period. And as I share with you, that since the World War was coming to an end, the soldiers were to be rehabilitated, the industries which were producing the war material were to be converted into industries which will produce the consumer good and capital good. So they set up a committee to develop a rehabilitation and reconstruction plan in 1940-46. Ambedkar was one of the members of that reconstruction committee, but his being an economist, he has a lot of influence in laying down the objective and strategy of that reconstruction plan. And if I read it properly now, because I have drawn it from all the material from the file, there is no material available. It was my book for the first time which brought the role of Dr. Ambedkar, Baba Saheb Ambedkar in water and power policy. So he laid down the objectives and the strategies of economic development. Let us very briefly in 5 minutes, those strategies need to be understood because they have relevance today. We talk about Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, but we do not take his policies and do not convert into actual practice. There are lessons as far as the strategies of economic development is concerned. Now, what is the strategy that he brought in the reconstruction plan? The strategy was simple. He used the theoretical framework of 1919 and applied into practice in the reconstruction plan. And what he said was that we will have to develop both agriculture and industry. But to develop agriculture, we have to reduce the surplus labor in agriculture, transfer it to industry, and provide the cheap labor supply to industry. So industrialization was just treated by him as a solution to the agriculture development. And therefore he emphasized on industrial development, electric power for industrial development. But at the same time emphasized on capital investment in agriculture in modern input, which we did in 1971. Green Revolution was because of that capital investment. But Dr. Ambedkar talked about those investment in new input as back as 1918. But he got an opportunity in 1942 to develop a strategy of economic development. So the strategy basically was emphasize on industry, transfer the surplus labor, invest in agriculture. Now this is what precisely we have done in the second plan. In fact, the second plan, Mahalanobis plan, is nothing but a plan of industrialization. But we don't recognize Ambedkar contributions. Now there are two more points about these strategies that I would like to mention about it. And that is very important in the relevant context. That of course the industries were to be converted into producing consumer good and capital good. In fact, I am very happy to share with you that you have the sandal soap factory here in Bangalore. It was started in much earlier. They were producing soap, very rough soap, to wash the clothes of the military persons, soldiers. And then this sandalwood factory continued and this modified and sophisticated. Now you have that sandalwood. Whenever I cross in Bangalore through that factory, I remembered the reconstruction plan of Dr. Ambedkar. Now the important point other important point about the strategy that we should remember is this, which is relevant today, that economic growth means, or economic development means, that the national income should increase. Now for last 8-10 years, we are only talking of growth, 5%, 10%, 6%, 7%. So we increase the income because we believe that if there is an increase in the income of the people will increase and their well-being will increase. Now this is a strategy which was suggested by Kuznets in 1956. That government should focus on increasing the income only, and once the income increases, the people will benefit. And he also argued, Kuznets also argued, that in the beginning there will be inequality, rich will benefit more than the poor, but after 30-40 years, even the poor will also get the benefit of the increased income through the trickle-down mechanism. The higher income will trickle down to the poor. So the strategy suggested by the World Bank and IMF was just focus on increasing the income, and that's what we are doing here now also. But later on in 80s, it was realized that in some of the countries, income increases rapidly, but poverty did not reduce. Income did not percolate to the poor as much it should have been. So people began to think, World Bank began to think, and a book was brought out, Redistributive Growth, where Montek Aluwale also wrote an article, and they say that no, growth alone strategy is not good enough. We require a growth in income, but we require a type of growth. A growth in income which will also give the income to the poor. So we require a pro-poor growth. We require an increase in the income, but we have also to see that that increased income also come in the hand of the poor. For example, we achieve a growth rate of 9% or 10% sometime. So if your additional income is increasing by 10 rupee beyond 100, where does this additional income of 10 rupees goes? If it goes 9 rupee goes in the hand of the rich people, poor will not benefit. But if out of 9, 5, 6 rupees go in the hand of the poor, their poverty will reduce. So the argument that later on was made in 80s and 2000 now, that we need a pro-poor growth. That growth in income is important, but that income should also lead to result in increase in the income of the poor so that poverty reduce. Now there is a additional thought on that, I will come to that later. Dr. Ambedkar, right in 1942 and 45, talked about pro-poor growth. Much before the World Bank began to talk in 2000. Now I think I'd like to read out his paragraph, which you will understand that how he was concerned about the pro-poor growth as such. If I am able to locate here. So he talked about pro-poor growth and inclusive growth in 1942. 11th plan and 12th plan talk about the inclusive growth and pro-poor growth for the first time on the advice of the World Bank. But Dr. Ambedkar talked about the pro-poor growth 42-46, and which we have to understand now. Now he was also a labor minister. So he suggested that the growth should be such that labor benefit, wages of the labor goes, you improve, their well-being should be improved, there should be job security and social security. He developed policy for the labor. All that policy for the labor that we have, most of them were developed by Dr. Ambedkar as a labor minister in 1942 and 46. Now about the growth, there is another aspect, and that I will mention you very quickly. While the World Bank in 2000 began to talk about pro-poor growth which is inclusive of poor, which 11th plan and 12th plan also agreed, there are economists from the Asian Development Bank in Manila who talks about the situation of development in Asia. They also talk about one particular aspect of growth, and that aspect is the following. Please understand that. That is necessary to understand Ambedkar's views. They argue that poor are not homogeneous. In India, for example, poor are high caste and poor are low caste also. Bulk of the poor are from untouchable and some of them are OBC, nomadic tribe, denotified tribe, but they are also poor from the high caste. Now the problem of poor, of the low caste and untouchables is similar to that of poor of high caste, but also different. The high caste poor do not suffer from caste discrimination and untouchability. They do not suffer from denial of economic right. They do not suffer from denial of access to water, denial of access to housing, denial of access to at time business and sale and purchase. So the problem of the untouchable poor are different than that of to a greater extent from that of high caste poor, and that problem is that the low caste poor, untouchable poor, in addition to the fact that they don't have capital asset, land and industry or anything, they also suffered from discrimination. Economic discrimination. And what does discrimination mean? Discrimination means denial of economic opportunity. In the past, they were denied the right to land. In the past, they were denied right to business. In the past, they were denied the right to education. That was not the case of high caste poor. High caste poor were not denied right to land or right to business or right to education. On the contrary, education was the privilege of the high caste. So therefore, you have to have a growth, not only pro-poor growth. Remember well, not only pro-poor growth, but the growth which will also increase the income of the discriminated group. not only the income of the non-discriminated group high caste, but also increase the income of the discriminated group of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, denotified tribe, women. Women were denied right to education. Now, if you want to have a quality employment, you have to have education. And if you are denied right to education, you cannot have an, access to quality employment. You are denied from business. And if you want to have your income increase, you have to have an opportunity to start business, but you are denied that. So the concept of non-discriminatory growth has come from Asian Development Bank, which it did not come from the Europe, because Europe do not have diversified society. We have as many religion as religion have in the world. We have caste system, we have difference between tribal and non-tribal. We have differences between male and female. But in European country, there is only one religion, Christianity. At the most two denominations, Catholic and the Protestant, but they don't have diversity. We have a diversity. And the diverse group are also subject to discrimination. Smaller group are excluded by the other group. Now, therefore, we require a not only proper growth, but also a growth which will increase the income of this discriminated group. And there has to be a separate policy for them. Now, here comes Dr. Ambedkar. As late as 1990, and of course in 1942 and 46, he argued for policies for the discriminated communities. He said general policy will help them, but you require an additional policy in addition to the general policy to give them the access to various sources of income. So today's non-discriminatory growth or disadvantage reducing growth, which we talk about in 2010, it was Carlson Stephen from Asian Development Bank who talked about the non-discriminatory development or non-discriminatory growth. Ambedkar developed the concept in 1990, but more precisely in 1942 and 46, that the growth should be such that it benefits scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, as well as the high caste. So, friend, let me summarize, because there are a lot many things about here, but I think Dr. Ambedkar's contribution in the economics is that much earlier he was way ahead of his time, and he talked about growth in income, but a type of growth which will help to reduce poverty, as well as a type of growth which will help the discriminated group to get access to the income and employment and education. That is the contribution of Dr. Ambedkar, which is very relevant even today. Now, let me come to the second policy then, the policy that is required even for the discriminated group, because he is the pioneer of that policy in the country. He talked about discrimination. Now there, one of the important contribution of Ambedkar is economic analysis of the caste system. I am not talking of social analysis, I am talking of economic analysis of the caste system, which led him to ask for the policy, affirmative action policy or reservation policy. What is the economic analysis of Dr. Ambedkar? Massive literature is available. I am not going to go into that. The first paper in Columbia he wrote on the caste, then annihilation of caste, hundreds of articles, who were Shudra, how they became the fourth Varna of Indian society, who were untouchable, how they became the fifth Varna of the Indian society, and massive literature. So I am not going to go into that, but in gist I will tell you his economic interpretation of the caste system. What is the economic interpretation of the caste system of Dr. Ambedkar, which led to the demand for the reservation policy? That economic analysis is simple. That the Indian social organization of Hindus, namely the caste system, divide people into 5 groups: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra and untouchable. It not only divide, but it assign the occupation and economic right. So it decide the economic right of the high caste, the higher caste, Kshatriya, the Vaishya, the Shudra and the untouchable. It doesn't stop only assigning and deciding the occupation and the economic right of the 5 castes, it also decide those rights or assign those rights in an unequal manner and a graded manner. That is the key thing. That Brahmins have more, all the property. Their major job is, of course, to teach and preach, but they can be cultivators, they can go into the military, they can also take a business. There is no restriction on Brahmin as far as the occupation is concerned, as laid down in Manusmriti. Kshatriya should confine to military, Vaishya should confine to business, Shudra should confine to agriculture. They did not have right to agriculture, Shudras, but later on they got the right to agriculture, and therefore most of the OBCs are cultivated now. But untouchable do not have any right. No right to land, no right to business, no right to education. And so the untouchable suffer the most from the economics of the caste system. So economics of caste system is based on the principle of unequal assignment of economic right. That is the key thing. Graded inequality. See, the straightforward inequality is very simple. Haves and have not. Poor and non-poor. Caste inequality is not like that. Caste inequality is graded. As you go down in caste hierarchy from high caste to the low caste, the economic right gets reduced. As you go up, the economic right goes up. So, this was the economic interpretation of Dr. Ambedkar, that the caste system produced economic inequality because caste system based on the principle and law of income inequality in the ownership of property, inequality in the ownership of education. And that continues. This continues in ancient period, medieval period, British period. I want to give an example from Karnataka, very interesting example. That is that the Britishers started education from indigenous people, Indian people in 1813. But there was no right for depressed classes for education. It is only in 1854 that they allowed the right to education to women and to depressed classes and poor in 1854 through an order. So public schools were set up. There was a school in Dharwad. And one Mahar boy from Dharwad went for admission in Dharwad school. He was rejected, the admission by the school. He said, no, education is confined to high caste, you can't get an admission. His father wrote and later to the Bombay Presidency head, Viceroy or whosoever was there, that look, you have equality to education, everybody has access to education, my son is denied because he is Mahar. The government did not take a decision in his favor. They say, yes, he has a right, but by admitting him, if the school is closed down in Dharwad, then what is the use? That was the situation of the untouchable. That despite law, they did not get access to the higher education. Later on, British then started separate school for the scheduled caste. They did not get the teacher, so they hired the Muslim teacher and all that. Anyway, the important point now that the economics of caste system is such that is denied economic right, particularly to the untouchable and also to Shudra in many spheres. Therefore, the pro-poor policy that we are talking about, Dr. Ambedkar argued that this policy should be such that there is equality of opportunity, equality of economic opportunity. If scheduled caste wanted to buy land, they should get a land. If scheduled caste wanted to enter into a business, they should have equal access to the business. If they wanted to have an employment, they should have equal access to the employment. If they wanted to have an education, they should have an education without discrimination. Now you see several cases of suicide in higher education institution, discrimination continues. So he said that there is equality of opportunity and equality before law in economic sphere should be there, and therefore there is a need for this. And then he said that since they do not receive equality, they do not have an equal opportunity in economic sphere, there has to be a policy. And that is the policy of reservation. That in 1990 to 1944, he asked for the reservation in legislature, he asked for the reservation in public employment, both public and private, he asked reservation in education, he asked fund for education development, and that is how the reservation policy has been accepted by the government. So Ambedkar was in a way founder of the reservation policy. And the beneficiary of those reservation policy are not only the scheduled caste. The moment it got for the scheduled caste, it was extended to scheduled tribe. It was extended to OBC. It was extended to denotified nomadic tribe. It was extended to religious minority in an informal manner. It was extended to women in an informal reservation policy. Now there is a demand for the sub-caste. Now there is a demand for the Dalit Christian and Dalit Muslim. And ultimately, there is a reservation policy for economic group approved by the constitution, irrespective of caste. So Dr. Ambedkar, understanding the diverse and the discriminatory and exclusionary character of the Indian society, proposed a policy of reservation which will provide equal access to the uh, discriminated group. Now friend, this is his basic contribution as far as his economic thoughts are concerned. Now there are relevance. I'll take another 10 minutes and finish. This is the historical account of his economic thought. He developed a theory of economic development, agriculture development. He developed a strategy of economic development. He developed the water and power policy for the first time in this country. He made an economic analysis of the caste system and suggested the economic policy for the economic empowerment of the scheduled caste and the other group. This he all did from 1990 to 1944. And at the end, in state and minorities, he really laid down the policy for the country. He said that everybody should have access to capital asset, land and enterprises. So he said, you nationalize the land and redistribute to everybody. So this was a socialist Ambedkar. And there should be a collective cultivation and people should give tax to the government. Basic and key industry should be with the government, which has happened really. Insurance, education and health should be with the government. This is the socialist, state socialism that he has given in state and minority. The rest of it was in private. So Ambedkar propagated socialist economy. And this socialist solution of distribution of land and enterprises and education and insurance under the state was for the economic empowerment of everybody. But he said that this will bring an economic empowerment of everybody, but there is an additional hurdle for the untouchables. That even if they have education, even if somebody untouchable graduate and high caste is a graduate, both enter into the market, high caste get an advantage of the caste and he will get a job. Untouchable will face discrimination, he will not get a job. He will not get equal opportunity to the labor market. So therefore, you have to give him a fair share, and the only way is to give him share in proportion to his population. So in state and minority, in addition to the economic policy, in terms of socialism, for economic empowerment, he also gives remedies against discrimination. And that remedies against discrimination is reservation in legislature, reservation in public and private employment, in education institution, reservation in executive, that is minister. The scheduled caste should also be minister. They should have a share in policy making. And he suggested the organization, SC/ST commission. So the remedies for economic empowerment, remedies against discrimination is the policy program which is suggested in 1947. Now this is, I have given you in brief. What is relevant today? There are 3 points of Dr. Ambedkar's relevance which this government, any government for that matter, should consider when we talk about and when we praise. We should not praise only Ambedkar and not accept his policies. The first is that economic inequalities are there. Dr. Ambedkar's entire writing is to reduce inequality in Indian society and have equity and social justice. But inequality persists, irrespective of caste. The ownership of wealth is highly concentrated. About 50 to 60% of the wealth in the country is in the hand of the bottom 10% of the people. And the large majority who are at the bottom, their share is of 10 to 12%. Untouchable are still continue to be predominantly landless. They continue to be more illiterate. They continue to be more unemployed. And they continue to deny access to civic amenities like water and residences. So, there is a need, there is a lesson from Dr. Ambedkar, is that the policy of reservation, or policy of giving a fair access should continue. Now what is important is that it has been accepted for untouchable and tribe, but there is a increasing demand for the group specific policies. Women are asking for a political reservation. Subcaste are asking reservation within the subcaste. Dalit Christians are asking, Dalit Muslims are asking. Now, on what ground we should justify their demand? I think there is a lesson from Dr. Ambedkar. From his economic analysis of the caste system, the lesson is this, that we have a graded inequality. All castes suffer from discrimination except the Brahmanas at the top. But the type of discrimination varies and economic deprivation also varies. Shudra did not have a right to education earlier, OBC. Now they have improved, but still their education level is low. But they have a land. Landless is not the predominant problem of OBC. Landless is the problem of the scheduled caste. So we can have a lesson from Dr. Ambedkar's writing that decide the reservation policy or any policy for each of the subgroup that they are asking on the basis of their economic standing, whether they own the capital means or not, and on the level of discrimination. Because discrimination is the basis for reservation policy. Economic is not the base for reservation policy. That must be considered clearly. Because economically well of scheduled caste as well as economically worse of scheduled caste both suffer from discrimination. High caste poor do not suffer from discrimination. So they don't require reservation policy. What they require is the economic empowerment. Reservation is an instrument of providing equal share and protection against discrimination is required only for those groups who suffer from discrimination. So we have a lesson from Ambedkar, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, that develop reservation policy for those groups who ask for the reservation if they suffer from discrimination. We should have studied and then take a decision. Similarly, the economic empowerment also should be based on whether they have ownership of capital asset or not. I think there are lessons because there are the increasing group of the people are asking for reservation. There is a lot of debate and fight, including Karnataka, Maharashtra, everywhere. The government doesn't take proper survey. Under the political pressure, give reservation. And then there are other groups say that these groups are economically better off, you are giving them the reservation. So there is a controversy. Therefore, what is required is the study whether they lack economic empowerment, whether they suffer discrimination or not. Discrimination is the major thing. Dr. Ambedkar took a position in 1920s when he asked reservation for scheduled caste that minority cannot be declared on the basis of population minority. That you have a small population, therefore you are minority, you need the protection. He said no. Group may be small, but it may be economically better off. Parsis, for example, whether a group suffer from discrimination or not, whether it is denied equal opportunity or not, is the basis for reservation policy. Now there is definitely a lesson from Dr. Ambedkar on both reducing inequality and developing reservation policy for various groups. There are several other implication of lessons from Dr. Ambedkar, but we can certainly discuss that later on. There is not a time. I would not want to take much of your time, but broadly I will say by summarizing that no other society suffered from economic equality and social equality as much as the Indian society suffer. Because our social system, namely caste system, Hindu social organization, is based on the principle of inequality. And Dr. Ambedkar focused entire academic attention on how to reduce economic equality, caste, tribal, gender, and bring an equality in the society. That was his main goal. So all his economic policies, his thought, strategies are for ensuring economic equity and social justice. And he has given, he has an academic analysis and he has given policy. There is a lot more there to learn from Dr. Ambedkar, but we don't do that. I can take an example of Supreme Court and stop it here. When Supreme Court make a decision about whether to give promotion or not, whether to give reservation or some group or not, they don't ask. They ask, go and give me a statistic whether they are underrepresented or not. If they are underrepresented, we will favor reservation. They don't understand that underrepresentation can be because of the lack of education and may not be necessarily due to discrimination. What they should ask that if the underrepresentation of a group is because of discrimination, then they deserve reservation. Otherwise not. Otherwise general economic policy. So I think there are many thought. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's economic thought need to be studied. And it's difficult, rigorous. Problem of Rupee, people talk about Problem of Rupee is the most difficult book by Dr. Ambedkar. It is on exchange rate. But it was very powerful. It resulted into setting up of Reserve Bank of India 10 years later. It also helped to decide the exchange rate by the Britishers. Britishers came with one pound with 6 rupees. Babasaheb said, no, 4 rupees. That will be help the Indians. So that was accepted by the Royal Commission, to which Bhadantaji were referring to. So I think I would end here. Thank you very much for honoring me with this Karnataka style, and giving me an opportunity to share with you. Thank you.